Hey guys, tonight we're scrubbing away the layers of romantic fog and peering into a world that was, quite literally, a bit ripe. Victorian hygiene, the glorious age of top hats, bustles, and enough hair oil to deep fry a Dickensian goose. We're not talking about the polite, perfumed scenes from your favourite costume drama. No, tonight you'll step into the real 1800s, where a hot bath was as rare as a dentist with a full set of teeth, and every city street was just one rainstorm away from becoming an open-air broth of mysterious origins. Before you get comfortable tonight, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is, and let us know how often you use deodorant to cover up not having showered for a few days. Now, dim the lights, crank up your fan for that gentle white noise and, for authenticity, maybe spritz the air with a touch of musty cellar and coal dust. And settle in. Get as cozy as you can, preferably not while wearing 16 layers of damp wool undergarments. Let's pause for a second. Did people really only bathe once a month? Was there such a thing as deodorant? Or did everyone just power through the aroma? How long could a respectable lady go without washing her hair before it turned into a bird sanctuary? Was the average Londoner's morning routine basically just try not to inhale too deeply? And what, exactly, did a Victorian toothbrush look like? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1854 London. The air is thick with fog, and something else you don't want to identify. Your water jug is frozen, your chamber pot is full, and the neighbour is playing Beethoven at full volume on a cracked piano. Welcome to Hygiene, Victorian style. You shuffle over to your chipped porcelain basin. The water inside is as cold as your neighbour's glare, and there's barely enough of it to drown a particularly determined flea. Your bath involves a brisk dab to the face and armpits with a rag that might once have been white, followed by a prayer that nobody sits too close on the omnibus. You stare into the cloudy depths of the basin, weighing your options. You could splash your whole face, but the memory of last week's brain freeze is still fresh. You dip your fingertips in and flinch. Victorian water is always precisely 3 degrees colder than your expectations. You squeeze out the rag, wring it for luck, and wipe your cheeks, creating a smear that's technically moisture but could easily pass for tears. That's it. Face, neck, and a swift pit-pat at the armpits. Legs and feet? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Those are an end-of-the-week kind of luxury. Your mother used to say, "Cleanliness is next to godliness." But here, in the raw dawn light, cleanliness feels about as distant as indoor heating. You look at the soapy residue circling the rim, evidence that someone sometime attempted a proper wash. Maybe it was you, back in April, when you briefly believed in self-improvement. The only soap available is a sliver the size of a postage stamp, smelling faintly of old lemons and regret. You rub it between your palms, willing it to multiply like the loaves and fishes, but all you achieve is a mild stickiness that you optimistically call fresh. The mirror, if you're lucky enough to have one, reflects a version of you that's at least slightly less sleep-deprived. You drag a comb through your hair. Victorian combs are known for 2 things: the ability to remove tangles and the ability to remove small mammals. You get both. You pick a lint ball from your ear and stare at it, pondering whether it's a sign you should do this more often or less. At some point, your sibling stomps in, demanding their turn, and you realize you've exceeded your allotted water rations for the day. If you're wealthy, the morning wash is performed in a sun-dappled dressing room, with a fresh jug of water delivered by an underpaid servant, and perhaps the gentle encouragement of lavender-scented towels. If you're not, it's more likely a shared slop of frigid tap water in the cramped corner of your single rented room. Some enterprising Victorians keep their basin beneath the bed, which sounds clever until you realize what else is under the bed. Sometimes, the cat drinks from it first. On colder days, the ice needs to be cracked with the handle of a hairbrush before you can even begin. Still, you persevere. The goal is not perfection, but plausible deniability. If someone on the train wrinkles their nose, you can always blame it on the man with the cabbage cart or the general aura of London. In the background, your neighbour is already scrubbing something against the washboard, grumbling about lye prices and the impossibility of ever feeling truly clean. You contemplate dunking your whole head, but the thought of walking around with icicles for sideburns stops you. Plus, who has time to explain that to your employer? There's a rhythm to this morning ritual, a soothing, if mildly desperate, choreography. Rinse, dab, sigh, repeat. The basin will be emptied into the alley by noon. The rag will dry stiff on the window latch, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. By now, your extremities are numb, your eyes a little brighter, and your courage, at least for the next few hours, restored. You may not smell like a bouquet, but in a city of coal, horses and mystery meat, you're doing your best. And in Victorian London, that's about as clean as it gets. The punchline? In a world obsessed with appearances, you've just completed the most essential step in Victorian self-care. Surviving the morning wash without frostbite, scandal, or accidentally watering the houseplants with your used basin water. And if you make it through the day without someone fainting in your presence, you're practically a hero. Hair washing is a biannual event, because why risk pneumonia, or worse, the shame of wet hair in public? Most folks simply brush vigorously, add a generous dollop of pomade, and hope the latest hat can hold back both fashion and biology. Your morning begins with the familiar sound of bristles scraping through a scalp that's somewhere between natural oils and accidental terrarium. The family comb, possibly inherited from an uncle who died of something you're really hoping wasn't contagious, is passed from hand to hand. Victorian combs are less a beauty implement and more a test of personal fortitude. They're made of bone or horn or whatever the local shopkeeper could scrape off a sheep. You drag it through your hair, flinching at every snag, each one a sharp reminder that the last time you washed your hair was during a different political administration. Today, you're not alone in the battle. Across the room, your sister is dusting her roots with a fine powder that smells like violets and looks suspiciously like expired flour. Hair powder is all the rage, at least for those who can afford the privilege of covering grime with a hint of lavender and a cloud of wishful thinking. The less fortunate just make do with a pat of coal dust or a discreet dab of cornstarch. Anything to break up the sheen and create the illusion of freshly washed locks. Now comes the main event, the application of pomade. Victorian pomade recipes are closely guarded family secrets, handed down through the generations and improved only by accident. The main ingredient? Lard. Yes. Honest-to-goodness pig fat, blended with beeswax and whatever else is lying around that might distract from the odour. You scoop out a generous dollop, always more than you think you need, and smear it across your scalp, taming stray hairs while instantly undoing any good the powder just did. For an extra touch of luxury, you might sprinkle in some rose water or a few drops of bergamot, hoping desperately that no one notices the base note is last week's leftovers. Your hairstyle choices are limited by circumstance, weather, and structural integrity. Women twist their hair into elaborate buns, held together with a dangerous arsenal of pins, combs, and sheer determination. Gentlemen, meanwhile, shape their sideburns and moustaches with a blend of oil, spit, and sometimes candle wax if it's a special occasion. The ideal is neat, tidy, and most importantly, covered. Hats are not just fashion, they're essential infrastructure. A top hat, a bonnet, or a battered newsboy cap isn't just there to impress. It's a protective shield against errant rain, bird activity, and the ever-present possibility of public humiliation. Washing, when it finally happens, is an ordeal. You schedule a whole day, heat a kettle, and steel your nerves. Victorian shampoos are a lively mix of eggs, gin, vinegar, and soapwort. Basically a liquid omelette with a cleaning problem. You lather up, rinse with cold water, and then spend the next 3 hours toweling, shaking, and praying your hair doesn't freeze into a solid mass before it's dry. Catching a chill from wet hair is the stuff of real terror, Every cough afterward is met with the haunted stare of someone who knows the obituary section intimately. For children, the process is even more haphazard. Parents attack tangles with a stiff brush, a stern lecture, and maybe a spot of goose fat. If lice appear, and they will, it's time for kerosene, vinegar, and the kind of combing that leaves psychological scars. Victorian hair care is equal parts patience and prayer. But no matter the effort, you step out into the world with your hair neat, shining in its own way, and heavily scented. If a passing breeze brings the faint aroma of bacon or pastry, just smile. In Victorian London, it's probably you. And if you catch your reflection in a shop window and your hair moves as one unit, congratulations, you've achieved the era's highest standard. Not stylish exactly, not even clean, but gloriously, stubbornly, and unmistakably Victorian. Once a week, if you're lucky, it's bath time, a ritual that involves dragging a copper tub into the kitchen, boiling endless kettles, and negotiating the complicated politics of who goes first. Spoiler, you're not first. The festivities begin with a lot of clattering and heaving as the ancient bathtub, last seen doubling as a laundry bin, and, once, as a temporary home for a traumatized goose, is wedged in front of the fireplace. There's a ceremonial groan from the floorboards, which have survived several generations of bad ideas, but might not survive this. The entire family mobilizes. One person chops wood, another tends the fire, and the unlucky are dispatched to haul bucket after bucket of freezing water from the pump or, if you're urban and daring, straight from the public spigot. Every drop must be heated on the stove, which means the kitchen is soon a foggy, steamy sauna scented lightly with cabbage and the ghost of last week's stew. The water goes in stages, producing clouds of steam and the kind of anticipation normally reserved for public executions. When the tub is finally ready, half full, because why risk luxury, you stand back and watch the family hierarchy play out. The eldest or the breadwinner goes first, sinking into the water like royalty into a tepid throne. There is much sighing and sloshing, a brief moment of actual cleanliness, and then it's over. No one lingers. Every minute is another degree of heat lost, and another layer of mysterious sediment settling to the bottom. Then it's the children's turn, eldest to youngest, because germs, like property, apparently trickle downward. Each child emerges with hair slicked to their head, slightly pinker than before, and smelling just faintly of overcooked vegetables and borrowed soap. By the time you finally get a turn, the water has achieved a level of opacity usually reserved for canal dredging. Floating islands of lint and something you suspect is half a sock swirl around your ankles. The temperature is lukewarm at best, but tradition demands you smile and pretend to enjoy the experience, if only to avoid a lecture about the value of cleanliness. For the truly unlucky, bath night coincides with a surprise visit from extended family. Suddenly, the queue is longer, the water cloudier, and your odds of getting anything resembling a rinse are as thin as your patience. In some homes, the final bather is the family pet, who seems to relish the moment, possibly out of spite. Soap is precious and often rationed, which means you're handed a sliver and warned not to waste it on arms. The technique is brisk. Quick scrub to the face, armpits, and anywhere that's likely to be sniffed by society, then an even quicker rinse before you start to notice just how cold the room has gotten. If you're lucky, you get a rough towel to dry off. If not, it's last week's shirt or a vigorous dance by the fire, which is now mostly embers. Bath night is, more than anything, a social event. Siblings jeer from the sidelines, parents issue stern instructions about not dawdling, and someone always manages to spill a bucket of fresh water at the most inconvenient moment. The air is thick with steam, laughter, and the undeniable tension of family members pretending not to look directly at one another. Privacy is a distant dream. Your dignity is as wrinkled as your toes. By the end of the ordeal, you wrap yourself in whatever dry cloth is left, shuffle off to bed, and hope the next week passes slowly. The tub is dragged away. The remaining water is thrown onto the street, where it will freeze into a treacherous obstacle for tomorrow's neighbours. and the family congratulates itself on surviving another round. You might not be sparkling, but you're cleaner than you were yesterday, and in Victorian England, that counts as a minor miracle. Plus, you've learned a valuable life lesson. The true meaning of taking the plunge isn't about courage. It's about resigning yourself to the fact that, sooner or later, everyone has to sit in someone else's bathwater. Dental care in the Victorian era means brushing with a bristle brush that looks suspiciously like a shoe polisher, dabbed with baking soda, or, if you're daring, a splash of urine. Dentists are avoided like the plague, possibly because they resemble enthusiastic butchers. Your morning oral hygiene ritual starts with a brush made from the bristles of some long-suffering animal, wedged into a handle carved from bone or wood. If you're middle class, maybe ivory. If you're working class, possibly just a stiff rag wrapped around a finger and a deep, meaningful hope that your ancestors' genetics were strong. There's toothpaste, technically. But it's not the minty stuff that makes your mouth tingle. Victorian toothpaste is a curious blend of soot, salt, chalk, or the occasional dash of charcoal. If you're feeling posh, a pinch of imported tooth powder. If you're feeling thrifty, ashes from last night's fire. Then comes the rinsing phase. Water is fine if you're fancy, but a quick swish with vinegar, gin, or straight-up urine is, according to more than one home remedy, a proven tooth whitener. The results are dubious, and the taste is unforgettable. If you're really unlucky, your family believes in the magical power of rubbing your teeth with cuttlefish bone, or lemon juice, or whatever the local newspaper said Queen Victoria might have tried once. None of these taste good. All of them are abrasive enough to double as sandpaper. The main goal is to keep the worst of the grime at bay, because the alternative is unthinkable, a trip to the dentist. In Victorian England, dentist is a generous term. The local barber surgeon, fresh from sharpening his straight razors, does double duty. His dental toolkit includes forceps, a hammer, and nerves of steel, or possibly just deafness. Anesthetics are rare, and when used, are more for show than actual pain relief. Nitrous oxide, laughing gas, has just started to make the rounds, but it's mostly a distraction from the fact that you're about to have your tooth yanked out by a man whose last patient was a sheepdog. If you complain of toothache, your options are limited. Extraction is the go-to solution. Fillings exist, but the materials are questionable. Molten lead, tin, gold foil, basically anything shiny and available. No one is quite sure if they're supposed to stay in your mouth. The process is loud, public, and conducted with a minimum of mercy. Sometimes the tooth comes out cleanly. Sometimes you leave with a little extra jawbone for your trouble. Afterwards you might rinse with brandy or salt water, or just try not to talk for a week. Preventive care is, at best, creative. There's a thriving market for breath sweeteners, little candies infused with licorice or cloves, which mask, but do not fix, the real problem. Victorians eat a lot of sugar, especially as the empire imports ever more exotic treats, so dental decay is rampant. Blackened teeth become so common among the upper classes that they almost achieve the status of a badge of wealth. Poorer folks, meanwhile, just gum their bread and try not to think about it. Occasionally, someone will attempt to floss, usually with a sturdy bit of thread or the pointed end of a quill. Sometimes a toothpick will do, or the corner of a playing card, or, for the truly desperate, the splintered edge of a matchstick. These innovations tend to end with a scream, a dropped match, and a vow never to try anything new again. But for most Victorians, oral hygiene is less about having a Hollywood smile and more about basic survival. If you can make it through the day without a throbbing ache or a visible abscess, you're ahead of the game. Smiling is less a social grace and more an act of bravery. Kissing? Only if you truly, deeply love someone, and even then maybe just a polite handshake. So as you finish your morning ablutions, spitting into a cracked basin and tucking away your battered brush, remember, in Victorian London, every tooth in your head is a small victory against time, sugar, and the ever-looming threat of amateur dentistry. And if anyone asks why you never smile in old photographs, just show them your toothbrush. They'll understand. For those without a tub, most people, public baths are the answer. Step inside a steam-filled hall packed with every flavour of humanity, and pay a penny to experience both cleanliness and the latest city gossip. The moment you walk in, you're hit with a wave of warm, damp air, scented with a heady blend of soap, wet wool, and vague ambition. Public baths in Victorian England are bustling, democratic places, one of the few venues where you can find a banker, a chimney sweep, and someone who swears they met Charles Dickens, all wrapped in towels and pretending not to stare at each other's ankles. The air is thick with the sound of splashing water, the hiss of kettles, and the low hum of voices swapping tales, complaints, and the latest scandal involving Mrs. Abernathy's prize-winning goose. The layout is straightforward but not private. A row of tin or copper tubs lines the tiled floor, each one separated by little more than a curtain, if you're lucky, or a polite turn of the head, if you're not. You pay your penny, claim a spot, and wait your turn as a thin attendant, whose main job is to look disinterested, fills each tub with a mix of boiling and cold water. There's always the chance you'll be splashed by your neighbour, whose enthusiasm for scrubbing seems inversely proportional to their understanding of personal space. Bath time here is never just about washing. It's a public performance, an opportunity to showcase your best lathering technique while keeping a running commentary on the affairs of the neighbourhood. You scrub yourself with soap that smells faintly of tar and roses, trying to ignore the suspicious slosh beneath your feet and the persistent draft coming from the door. Somewhere in the corner, a group of children giggle over a shared bucket, their mother eyeing them like a hawk to make sure nobody drowns, or worse, steals her precious cake of soap. If you're shy, the public bath is a challenge. Privacy is theoretical, and the curtain has more holes than a colander. The bather on your left discusses his ingrown toenail in excruciating detail, while the one on your right is determined to wash every article of clothing he owns, including, quite possibly, the hat on his head. A symphony of coughs, sneezes, and the occasional off-key whistle fills the steamy air, punctuated by the shriek of someone discovering exactly how cold the cold bucket really is. For women, the experience is equal parts social club and obstacle course. Ladies' hours mean catching up with friends, sharing hair tips, and, for the bold, swapping recipes for home remedies that promise to banish everything from freckles to heartbreak. The bath matron, part warden, part therapist, makes the rounds with stern reminders about time limits, decency, and not splashing the walls. Meanwhile, the youngest girls shriek and race, while grandmothers huddle in corners, soaking their feet and dispensing advice on husbands and proper undergarments. And then there's the great equalizer, the shared soap and the communal towel, washed in theory after every use, but looking suspiciously like it's been in circulation since the previous monarch. The soap is whittled down to a thin sliver, the towel is scratchy and damp, and you tell yourself it's exfoliating. Still, everyone pretends not to notice, because in the end, the point isn't to leave spotless, but to leave at all. When you finally step outside, hair dripping and skin tingling from the effort, you've achieved a unique kind of Victorian freshness. Not exactly clean, but certainly more hydrated and above all, up to date on everyone else's affairs. You return home with the vague sense that you've survived not just a bath, but a trial by water, steam, and small talk. Your body may be cleaner, but your mind is now heavy with a week's worth of new rumours. And so, the public bath remains the great social leveller, a place where dignity, privacy, and sometimes your last bar of soap are sacrificed for the fleeting glory of being, if only for a few hours, the cleanest person in your street. There's no indoor plumbing. Instead, your private moments happen in a porcelain pot that waits patiently beneath your bed, radiating threat. Emptying it is a job for the lowest member of the household, or, failing that, a person with a deadened sense of smell. Let's set the scene. It's 2 a.m, and nature calls. You grope blindly for your slippers, careful not to kick the chamber pot, and unleash last night's mistake onto your only pair of socks. The room is chilly, the floorboards creak like a shipwreck, and the last thing you want is to step in something that isn't supposed to be there. Still, the alternative is a long trek outside to the privy, through dark alleyways or muddy courtyards, in the company of rats, stray cats, and the occasional neighbour whose insomnia is matched only by their curiosity. So, you do what every sensible Victorian does. You grab the chamber pot, pray the lid is on tight, and hope that nobody is awake to witness the orchestration of balance and dignity that is about to unfold. Chamber pots come in all shapes and sizes, some plain, some decorated with cheery flowers or political cartoons, a little humour to take the edge off. But the function is universal. For a brief, uncomfortable moment, the pot becomes the centerpiece of your domestic universe. Daytime brings a different challenge. The ritual of emptying. No one wants the job. The family cat eyes you with what can only be described as schadenfreude as you gingerly lift the pot and tiptoe through the house, doing your best impersonation of a bomb disposal expert. The stairs seem steeper, the hallway longer, and every bump is a test of nerves. If you're a servant, this is the highlight of your morning. If you're not, you quickly develop a robust sense of detachment. The official protocol is to empty the contents into the backyard privy or a designated cesspit, but corners are often cut. Some tenants in tall buildings simply open the window and let gravity do the work, shouting a polite garde low to warn the unfortunate below, a French phrase that means watch out for the water, though water is rarely the main ingredient. This custom ensures that walking down certain alleys is an extreme sport requiring both speed and luck. Cleaning the chamber pot is an exercise in stoicism. Soap and water are your friends, though some swear by a splash of vinegar or a brisk rinse with hot ashes. No matter what you do, there's always a faint aroma, an olfactory souvenir that clings stubbornly to the porcelain and occasionally to you. In wealthier homes, elaborate systems are developed. Decorated commodes, fitted lids, and servants whose sole job is to make sure you never have to confront the evidence of your own biology. In poorer households, one pot might be shared between several people, raising the stakes and lowering the overall air quality. For children, the chamber pot is both a source of mystery and a rite of passage. Toddlers graduate from makeshift potties to the family pot with pride, while older siblings perfect the art of denial. That's not mine, and avoidance. I'll do it after breakfast, I swear. In the depths of winter, a cold chamber pot is a uniquely bracing experience, one that sharpens the senses and inspires the kind of swift efficiency rarely seen outside of emergency situations. Yet, despite its horror, the chamber pot is an essential part of Victorian life. It is the silent, stinky sentinel beneath the bed, the unsung hero of midnight emergencies and lazy mornings. It teaches humility, patience, and the value of keeping your shoes on at all times. The chamber pot is a grim reminder that history's great innovations are often born from daily indignity. And if you're lucky enough to avoid a spill, a slip, or the horror of being the last to empty it, you've already won the quietest, most important victory of the day. At dawn, armies of night soil men prowl the streets, collecting last night's chamber pot contents in giant carts. They're paid poorly, respected less, but absolutely vital for keeping the city from drowning in its own filth. The workday for a night soil man begins before the city stirs. While respectable Victorians still dream of roast beef and empire, these men are already out, shovels in hand, boots caked in mud, and a sense of grim determination in their eyes. Their uniforms are whatever clothes survived the previous week's stains and splashes. Gloves are for the wealthy. The night soil man's only protection is experience and a profound sense of resignation. Their task is simple, if not enviable. Go door to door, alley to alley, collecting the contents of every chamber, pot, privy and cesspit in town. Armed with a long-handled scoop and a battered lantern, they trudge from house to house, upending pots, barrels, and sometimes entire makeshift outhouses into their waiting carts. Each cart is a rolling monument to human creativity and digestive distress, a cacophony of sights and smells best left to the imagination. The job is as much about timing as it is about bravery. Arrive too early, and you're treated to the chorus of protests from half-asleep tenants. Arrive too late, and the sun begins to rise, carrying with it both the heat and the city's collective indignation. For the night soilman, discretion is key. Moving through shadowy back lanes, they avoid the main streets, working as quietly as possible. No one wants to witness the daily removal of last night's regrets, out of sight, out of mind, preferably out of nose. Still, everyone knows when the night soil men have passed. They leave behind cleaner streets, a faint odour that lingers like a bad memory, and the faint but satisfying knowledge that you will not, in fact, step out your front door into a river of yesterday's stew. It is an unglamorous job, but an absolutely necessary one. Without them, the city would grind to a halt within days, overwhelmed by its own waste. Disease, already a constant companion, would flourish. The night soil men keep the city on just this side of livable. Their route is both a marathon and an obstacle course. They navigate icy cobblestones in winter, ankle-deep mud in spring, and, in the height of summer, a stench so powerful that even the rats hold their noses. The city's geography is mapped in their memories, not by landmarks, but by the quality and quantity of each household's contributions. Some families leave generous tips, a token of gratitude for a job no one else wants. Most offer only averted eyes and a mumbled apology for the state of affairs. At the end of the route, the collected waste is hauled to the edge of town, where it is either buried, dumped in pits, or, if the city is feeling enterprising, sold as fertilizer to nearby farms. In this way, the cycle of Victorian life continues. What leaves the chamber pot might one day return in the form of next season's cabbage. It's not exactly poetic, but it's undeniably efficient. Socially, the night soil men occupy a strange place. Children point and giggle, adults cross the street. The men themselves are resigned to the fact that theirs is a necessary evil. In a world obsessed with appearances, theirs is a job that everyone depends on and no one wants to talk about. They are invisible, except for those moments when invisibility is impossible. But for all their thankless toil, night soil men possess a peculiar pride. Their work is hard, dangerous, and occasionally soul-crushing, but the city cannot function without them. They are the unsung backbone of urban hygiene, heroes or villains, depending on which way the wind is blowing. And so, when you think of Victorian London, don't just imagine the grand ballrooms and gas-lit streets. Spare a thought for the men trundling through the shadows, carting away what the city leaves behind, ensuring the sun rises on streets you can walk without wading. If that's not heroic, nothing is. Washing clothes is a multi-day ordeal. You lug buckets, scrub with lye soap, and hope the neighbours don't see your bloomers flapping on the line like flags of surrender. Bonus points for any garment that survives the process. It starts before sunrise, because if you want any hope of drying your shirts before dusk, you need to beat the sun and everyone else in your street. You gather every dirty sock, undergarment, and tea-stained handkerchief that's been hiding under beds, stuffed into corners, or worn long past the point of plausible deniability. The laundry basket is never large enough. The family's Sunday best gets extra care. The everyday work shirts get the same treatment as potatoes, roughly washed, battered, and hopefully not eaten by mistake. First step: water. In a world without running taps, water is a precious, back-breaking commodity. You trudge to the nearest well or pump with heavy buckets, battling stiff wind, cold drizzle, and the distinct impression that every bird in the neighbourhood is laughing at you. The buckets are hauled back to the house, splashing half their contents on your shoes, which, incidentally, are now the cleanest thing you own. If you're lucky, Someone has lit a fire under a giant copper cauldron, and soon the air is thick with the scent of boiling linen and burning patience. Soap, too, is its own adventure. Lye soap is standard, cheap, harsh, and capable of stripping the skin off a rhinoceros if you're not careful. It's made from animal fat and caustic soda, and comes in hefty, unyielding blocks. You shave off slices, dissolve them in boiling water, and hope the resulting mixture doesn't eat through the wash tub. If you're especially unfortunate, you run out halfway through and have to substitute with sand, ashes, or, on a truly desperate day, a fistful of last year's soap shavings. The main event is the scrubbing. Victorian laundry is less about gentle persuasion and more about brute force. You attack each garment with a washboard, which is just as comfortable as it sounds, and rub, twist, and thwack the fabric until your knuckles are raw and your arms feel like overcooked noodles. Stains are pre-treated with more soap, vinegar, or the secret weapon, boiling water and desperate hope. Every family has their own remedies. Some swear by rubbing stains with potato, others with kerosene, and a few, in a fit of optimism, try lemon juice, though the lemons usually end up in someone's gin. Rinsing comes next. If you're lucky, you have a second tub. If not, you dump the soapy water and refill, fingers numb and red, with cold water from the pump. Your hands are so shriveled they could pass for pickled walnuts. And the only thing keeping you going is the fantasy of clean sheets and possibly being able to see your reflection in your own shirt. A fantasy that, in truth, is never realized. Finally, the great hanging. The yard or rooftop is transformed into a battleground of flapping shirts, nightgowns, and socks waving like surrender flags. You pin each item up quickly, praying the wind doesn't snatch them away and send your dignity hurtling into the neighbour's garden. Nothing says good morning like chasing your drawers through a street crowded with amused passers-by. And then you wait. In winter, drying takes all day, and sometimes the clothes freeze into sculptural interpretations of your exhaustion. In summer, you're in a race against sudden rain, dust storms, and the neighbour's cat, who has a sixth sense for clean linen. Once dry, or dry-ish, you collect everything, marvel at the occasional mystery sock, and face the final ordeal, ironing. The iron is a cast-iron beast, heated on the stove and wielded like a weapon. You scorch as many items as you smooth, and by the end, your muscles are trembling and your resolve is spent. Laundry day is less a chore and more a test of character. When it's finally over, you collapse into bed, inhaling the sharp, oddly comforting scent of lie and defeat. You may never look spotless, but at least your bloomers are briefly clean, and in Victorian England, that's something worth waving a flag about, even if it's just an old undershirt, flapping proudly in the breeze. Victorians wore enough undergarments to upholster a fainting couch. The catch? They're rarely washed. Most folks rotate a few sets, letting yesterday's air out by hanging drawers over a chair and pretending that counts as cleaning. The first step in any respectable Victorian's daily struggle is wriggling into what feels like a full set of drapes. Long linen drawers, thick woolen stockings, undershirts, chemises, and, for the particularly ambitious, a corset or two. Men squeeze into union suits or long johns, which offer all the support of a gentle hug from a sandpapered octopus. Women layer chemise over petticoat, the clothing equivalent of a family-sized lasagna, all in the name of decency, modesty, and making sure no one catches a glimpse of an ankle and immediately faints dead away. Of course, these garments are not exactly designed for comfort. Linen itches, wool scratches, and the combined effect is like living inside a mildly aggressive hedge. But Victorians are not ones to complain, at least not out loud, in public. Instead, you get used to the daily ritual of tucking, fastening, and adjusting, hoping you won't have to make any sudden movements or, God forbid, need to run for a bus. Corsets and stays are tugged and laced with grim determination, cinching waists into shapes most people associate with wasps or overly ambitious hourglasses. The process takes time, patience, and the assistance of someone with strong arms and a loose grasp on personal boundaries. The point of all these layers isn't just modesty. It's also hygiene, at least. That's the idea. The theory goes, if you keep your outer clothes clean, nobody cares what's happening underneath. Your underthings absorb all the sweat, dust, and existential dread of the day, so that your expensive dress or suit can go another week or month without a full wash. As a result, underwear is worn, aired, and worn again in a never-ending cycle of that'll do. When your set is feeling particularly ripe, you hang it over a chair by the window, hoping a stiff breeze will do what soap and water have not. Laundry day, when it comes, is a day of reckoning. Underwear is boiled, scrubbed, and hung up for the entire street to see. Nothing says social status like a line of bloomers flapping in the wind. Children chase after rogue undergarments with all the enthusiasm of foxhounds on the hunt. Embarrassment is inevitable. The only question is whether it'll be your underpants or your dignity that makes its way into Mrs. Fotheringill's rose bushes this week. And then there's the matter of repairs. Victorian underclothes are designed to last, but life is hard on fabric. Tiny tears are patched, waistbands are mended, and stockings are darned within an inch of their lives. A skilled needleworker can make a pair of drawers outlast the reign of 3 monarchs, though at some point there are more patches than original material. If you're poor, you keep patching until even the patches have patches. If you're rich, you donate your cast-offs to charity, where they are promptly put back into rotation by someone with even fewer options. Still, the importance of proper underwear cannot be overstated. It's a buffer against cold, a shield against chafing, and a silent witness to every awkward moment of the day. It soaks up more than just sweat. It absorbs secrets, spilled tea, and the occasional fainting spell. Every evening, you peel away the layers, feeling approximately 5 pounds lighter, and hang them up to air, hoping the fabric will regain its shape and your dignity will recover overnight. So next time you pull on a pair of fresh, elastic-waisted briefs, spare a thought for your Victorian ancestors, weighed down by layers and etiquette, and comfort yourself with the knowledge that, while their undergarments might have been legion, their actual cleanliness was mostly wishful thinking. In the Victorian era, you're not just wearing underwear, you're surviving it. When all else fails, perfume to the rescue. Both men and women douse themselves in cologne, lavender water, or violet powder, hoping desperately that no one realizes the underlying theme is eau de desperation. Victorian life is a continuous olfactory adventure, and not in the good way. Between the coal smoke, crowded streets, questionable plumbing, and a general aversion to anything resembling a regular bath, the air is thick with history and the scent of not quite fresh. So Victorians do what any sensible person does when confronted with overwhelming odds. They try to cover it up with science and hope. Perfume becomes the last line of defense, a fragrant force field between your dignity and public shame. A morning routine might involve a hurried dab of cologne on each wrist and a heroic splash down the front of your shirt, never mind if you look like you just lost a drinking contest with the aftershave bottle. Some swear by rosewater, its floral aroma fighting a desperate duel against last night's boiled cabbage and the faint but persistent hint of horse. Others go for lavender, a classic for its calming effects, or citrus, which, in theory, cuts through the smell of last week's laundry. These aren't just gentle fragrances. These are weapons, grade aromas designed to stun the nose and buy you precious minutes of plausible freshness. And if a liquid won't do, there's always powder. Powders are everywhere, on wigs, on faces, on feet, and liberally dusted down shirts and drawers in an optimistic bid to absorb the daily damp. Violet powder is fashionable and gives a faint whiff of elegance, while orris root and talcum powder serve as the everyday heroes, making sure your armpits remain slightly less tragic than your shoes. The powder isn't just about scent, it's also about mattifying the constant Victorian glow, also known as sweat, and keeping layers of clothing from welding themselves to your skin. Of course, all this comes at a price. Perfumes and powders don't just mask unpleasant smells, they mingle with them, creating potent new aromas science has yet to properly classify. The result is a complex bouquet, a top note of lilies, a heart of sandalwood, and a long, lingering finish of slightly musty wool. Sometimes, when everyone on the omnibus has made the same calculation, the competing fragrances join forces to create something so powerful it could strip wallpaper. For the wealthy, perfume is also a status symbol. Glass bottles adorned with filigree sit on vanity tables like tiny monuments to excess. Exclusive scents imported from Paris are splashed about with abandon, and the air in the drawing room is heavy with evidence that, yes, this household can afford to pretend it's clean. For the working classes, even the faintest hint of lavender water is a small rebellion against their circumstances, a pocket-sized piece of dignity they can carry with them. Yet, there's a fine line between pleasantly fragrant and aggressively aromatic. Apply too little, and you might as well not bother. Apply too much, and you risk asphyxiating your friends or, worse, revealing that your commitment to actual cleanliness is more theoretical than practical. Social etiquette dictates a careful balance. Just enough scent to suggest effort, not so much that people suspect you're hiding something bigger. And sometimes, despite your best efforts, the day wins. A surprise downpour washes away your lavender, leaving only the stark truth of your Monday morning self. A sudden heat wave turns even the finest violet powder into something that resembles cake icing gone wrong. But still, you persist. Every spritz and every puff of powder is an act of hope, a declaration that you refuse to surrender to the chaos of the senses. So as you head out the door, perfumed and powdered, remember, in Victorian London, you're not just presenting yourself to the world, you're waging a one-person war against the inevitable. You may not win, but you'll smell like you tried. But it's not just the animal kingdom claiming the streets. Human traffic adds to the mayhem. Shoppers, street hawkers, chimney sweeps, errand boys, and the occasional nervous chicken all jostle for space. Ladies lift their skirts and tiptoe along the driest patches, but there's always a risk of stepping on something that squelches. Men in tall hats stride bravely through the mess, only to be betrayed by a hidden banana peel or the unholy combination of soap suds and mystery slime trickling down from the upstairs laundries. The smells, meanwhile, are operatic in their complexity. There's the ever-present bass note of damp earth and manure, layered with the sharper scents of vinegar from pickling shops, rotting produce from the greengrocer, fish guts from market stalls, and the sweet, cloying aroma of spilled beer outside the nearest pub. On Sundays, the stench briefly gives way to clouds of roasting meat and the promise of gravy. But by Monday morning, the miasma is back, stronger than ever, fueled by the weekend's excesses and the city's refusal to be tamed. On rare, sunny days, dust swirls up from the streets, coating everyone and everything in a fine, grey grit. Rainy days are somehow worse. The mud multiplies, the gutters overflow, and every step is a gamble. Even the most fashionable of boots cannot withstand the onslaught. Galoshes are prized possessions, and children compete to see who can jump the widest puddle without disappearing altogether. Occasionally, the city sends out teams of street sweepers, armed with brooms and determination, to do battle with the worst of the muck. Their efforts are valiant but mostly futile. Within hours, the tide of filth returns, and the sweepers retreat in defeat, followed by the triumphant march of new rubbish. And yet, somehow, life goes on. Shopkeepers open their shutters, costermongers set up stalls, and people hurry about their business, expertly hopping over the worst of it with practiced grace. The chaos is strangely comforting. The street is alive, an ever-changing mosaic of mess and movement. So if you find yourself standing on a Victorian curb, boots muddy and nostrils overwhelmed, just remember, everyone else is in it with you, one squelching, slightly mysterious step at a time. And if you make it home with your dignity and socks intact, consider it a small miracle in the great, mucky ballet of London life. For the poor, daily cleanliness is an impossible luxury. Water costs money, soap costs more, and free time is a legend. Most workers freshen up with a wipe of the hands and a shrug. It's not that working-class Victorians don't want to be clean. It's that the universe, economics, and the city's plumbing situation have all conspired against them. Take the average labourer, up before dawn, bundled in the same patched shirt and trousers he's worn for 3 years, off to a day spent shoveling coal, hauling crates, or squeezing through machinery that's allergic to anything white. By the time he gets home, the only thing standing between him and total collapse is a crust of bread, a mug of tea, and the faint hope of a second-hand wash. Water is precious, drawn from a communal pump, carried up 3 flights of rickety stairs, and usually tepid by the time it makes it to the top. Every drop is rationed. If you're lucky, you can spare a pint for a quick splash to the face and hands, and maybe, if no one is looking, a hasty rinse behind the ears. The rest of your personal hygiene depends on the power of positive thinking, and the wind's ability to whisk away most of your more creative aromas. Soap, on the other hand, is luxury incarnate. Real soap, chunky, yellow, and harsh, costs a week's wages. Most working-class families use it for the public bits only. Hands, face, and whatever's on display at Sunday church. For everything else, there's lye, sand, or the ever-popular strategy of vigorous rubbing. Sometimes, a communal block of soap is stretched so thin it becomes more spiritual than material, passed between siblings, lost in buckets, and eventually replaced with nothing but stern looks and wishful thinking. For most, a full bath is a festival event, reserved for high holidays or truly catastrophic occasions. The lucky have access to the public bathhouses, but even these cost precious pennies. More often, families improvise. A quick rinse in a shared tin basin, a surreptitious dunk at the local canal, try not to swallow, or for the especially desperate, standing in the yard in a thunderstorm and letting nature take its course. Clothes fare little better. Work shirts and dresses are washed on the rare occasion they're in danger of developing a crust. Otherwise, they're brushed, beaten, and hung in windows for a good airing. Underclothes, as we've seen, are recycled with the frequency and optimism of a Victorian penny dreadful, hoping that a night on the chair by the window will work some kind of miracle. Shoes are wiped, not polished. Hats are dusted, not cleaned. And jackets are beaten, not laundered, because they'll dry out eventually and look, from a distance, almost respectable. Children are the most feral. Sent out into the city at dawn, they return with a fine patina of dirt, bruises, and leftover toffee stuck in their hair. Mothers sigh, lick their thumbs, and scrub the worst of it away with spit and a rag, muttering about cleanliness and godliness, as if saying it enough times will make it true. At some point, everyone lines up for a quick sniff test. Anyone who fails is sent back outside until they air out. Still, there's a strange dignity to it all. Cleanliness may be aspirational, but resilience is mandatory. Neighbours share water when they can, swap soap scraps, and gossip about whose backyard privy is the worst. There's no judgment, only mutual understanding that everyone's fighting the same losing battle against grime. The only real sin is pretending otherwise. So when you read about the Great Unwashed, know that it was less about laziness and more about survival. Every clean handkerchief, every fresh face, was an act of rebellion against poverty and the city itself. The working class may not have smelled like roses, but they survived, endured, and managed to keep a little pride, one splash, one scrub, one shrug at a time. The rich have servants to handle the dirty work, and themselves. Private bathrooms, silver-plated brushes, and custom scents. The poor? They make do or don't. Nowhere is the Victorian obsession with hierarchy more obvious than in the great divide between the freshly scrubbed and the perpetually grimy. For the upstairs crowd, lords, ladies, and anyone lucky enough to have of leisure in their social description, cleanliness is a team sport, played with a full roster of maids, valets, and footmen. A well-appointed townhouse might boast a personal bath, a water closet, and enough hot water to fill a small moat. Of course, the water didn't heat itself. Below stairs, someone is always stoking the fires, hauling the buckets, and ensuring that when Lady Everingham finally decides to bathe, the temperature is exactly halfway between Swan Pond and mildly scalding. A lady's morning routine could fill a novel, or at least a solid chapter in her diary. She sits at a vanity, overflowing with delicate bottles, brushes and combs, fit for a minor princess. There's a silver-backed hairbrush for each type of hair day, ivory-handled combs for every occasion, and towels so soft they practically apologize for drying you. Her maid stands ready with a jug of warm water and a basin, performing the sacred ablutions with all the precision of a chemist and the patience of a saint. The mistress emerges perfumed, powdered, and perfectly arranged. Her hands never touch soap unless she feels especially rustic. Men upstairs have it only a little rougher. A valet draws their bath, polishes their boots, and ensures the shaving water is always just right. Razors are stropped, shaving brushes frothed, and every whisker is dispatched with clinical efficiency. A gentleman's aftershave is imported and comes in bottles fancier than some people's entire wardrobes. A day that begins with such attention to detail can only end with a pair of gloves and an air of mild condescension. Meanwhile, downstairs, things are less delicate. The servants who maintain all this finery do so with hands that are perpetually chapped and raw, thanks to the ceaseless parade of lye, boiling water, and scrubbing brushes. Their baths, if they get one, are quick affairs with whatever water remains after the master and mistress have finished. There's no perfumed soap, just the coarse stuff, often homemade, that doubles as floor cleaner and stain remover. Personal grooming is done on the fly. A comb hastily dragged through hair, a splash of water from the kitchen pump, and a fervent prayer that no one important comes down to the scullery at the wrong moment. Class isn't just about money. It's about who gets to ignore the physical realities of being alive. The upstairs folk float through clouds of lavender and rose, convinced that hard work is a picturesque activity performed by peasants in paintings. Downstairs, the servants exchange knowing glances, sharing soap scraps and rumours, while racing to finish their own routines before the next bell rings. If someone ever does catch a glimpse of a maid's cracked knuckles or a footman's grimy shirt collar, it's quietly ignored. After all, the illusion of effortless elegance must be maintained at all costs. The difference in access to cleanliness extends to everything. Linens that are laundered daily, upstairs, versus linens that are laundered eventually, downstairs. Toothbrushes of boar bristle and gold leaf, upstairs, versus a hopeful chew on a licorice root, downstairs. Even the air smells different. Upstairs, beeswax and bouquets. Downstairs, cabbage, coal dust, and whatever the cook just set on fire. And yet, in both worlds, the game is the same. Everyone is fighting the same war against dirt, grime, and the indignities of 19th century plumbing. Only some are better armed than others. So the next time you picture a grand Victorian manor, don't just imagine the glittering chandeliers and silk wallpaper. Remember the army of invisible hands making it all possible, and the stark line that divided the well-scented from the weary. Cleanliness may have been next to godliness, but for most, it was also just another way to tell who belonged upstairs and who belonged down. The flush toilet arrives, but not for everyone. Most homes still rely on privies, outhouses, or a handy alleyway. If you're very lucky, you get a brand new water closet. If not, well, mind your step. The history of Victorian sanitation is one long story of optimism colliding with reality. Flush toilets, the water closet as they're formally known, are the latest marvel of engineering, promising privacy, dignity, and the thrill of pulling a chain to make your troubles disappear with a satisfying whoosh. At least, that's the dream. For the well-heeled, a water closet is the ultimate status symbol. Gleaming porcelain, intricate pipes, and a little room set aside just for sitting and pondering life's big questions in relative comfort. For most Londoners, however, the dream is far from reality. Outside the grand houses, life is still ruled by the old privy, usually a small wooden hut at the far end of a garden, complete with spiders, splinters, and a chill that could freeze ambition. It's a test of character to brave a midnight visit in winter, armed only with a candle and the hope that nothing's lurking in the shadows. Some privies are communal, shared by entire tenement blocks. Here, privacy means hoping no one peeks through the gaps in the wood, and hygiene is more of an aspiration than a practice. In densely packed city slums, even the privy is a luxury. Alleyways and dark corners serve as public toilets, much to the distress of anyone with a sense of smell or clean shoes. The city, constantly battling with overflowing cesspools and the cheerful contributions of countless chamber pots, relies on a network of night soil men and sewer workers to keep things barely under control. The phrase "don't look down" becomes less advice and more a survival strategy. When water closets do appear, they're not always as magical as advertised. Early plumbing is a wild west of leaky pipes and unpredictable drainage. Some units back up, flooding the floor with the ghosts of dinners past. Others are so noisy they announce your business to the entire household. Privacy comes at the price of discretion. Still, the promise of being able to go indoors, without braving the elements or the neighbour's judgmental gaze, is enough to forgive almost any flaw. Maintenance is its own challenge. If you're rich, you have a servant or a sanitary engineer, that's a plumber with a top hat, to fuss over the workings. If not, you're on your own, poking at mysterious clogs with a broom handle and praying the whole system doesn't erupt. There are entire neighbourhoods where flushing is best done when the neighbours are out. No one wants to be responsible for a minor flood cascading down through the building. Occasionally, inventors promise improvements. Self-cleaning pans, better ventilation, traps for the more adventurous rodents. The results are mixed. Of course, all this progress comes with social tension. The water closet is both a marvel and a moral panic. Is it hygienic? Is it proper? Will sitting on cold porcelain rob you of your youthful vigour? Debates rage in the newspapers. Etiquette guides offer lengthy instructions on how to use the new invention without alarming your friends or yourself. Meanwhile, the majority quietly continue their visits to the backyard privy, thankful for any arrangement that keeps the worst of humanity's inventions at arm's length. Children naturally adapt fastest. A new water closet is a source of fascination, chains to pull, noises to giggle at, and a place to hide during games of hide and seek until they are inevitably found by a very confused adult. Pets, on the other hand, are less impressed, regarding the entire process as a peculiar human ritual. So, whether you're perched on a porcelain throne or teetering in a rickety outhouse, remember, Victorian sanitation was never about perfection. It was about making do, muddling through, and inventing new ways to keep the mess, mostly, outside. Progress, in this case, truly marches slowly, sometimes right through the middle of your kitchen. Every Victorian shares their bed with a lively menagerie of insects. Bed curtains are for decoration and for trapping the local wildlife. If you wake up without a bite, you're probably dreaming. As the evening lamp is snuffed and you tuck yourself in for the night, the last thing on your mind should be pest control. But in Victorian England, pest control isn't so much a battle as it is a mutual agreement to try not to scream every morning. The first rule of bedtime: never shake out your sheets too enthusiastically, lest you trigger an impromptu stampede. You've already endured a long day of coal dust, city grit, and neighbourly gossip. Now, beneath layers of patched linen, you're never alone. Your skin prickles. The tiniest itch could be anything: a stray crumb, a flake of wool, or a small creature with legs and ambition. Lice are ever present, moving from head to head with all the subtlety of an uninvited house guest. Fleas, meanwhile, are gymnasts, capable of leaping entire pillow widths in a single bound. Bedbugs are the real professionals, hiding in the seams of your mattress, emerging only under cover of darkness to leave their mark, an itchy constellation on your arms and legs. Nightly routines take on a militaristic edge. Combs with impossibly fine teeth, known as knit combs, are dragged mercilessly through hair, snagging both tangles and tenants. For especially stubborn cases, the family resorts to home remedies: kerosene, vinegar, a brisk rub-down with cold lye soap, and, if things are truly dire, simply cutting your hair and starting over. Parents inspect their children's scalps by candlelight, squinting for movement and muttering oaths passed down from ancestors who also lost this war. Bed curtains, those elegant fabric panels, serve a dual purpose. They're supposed to offer privacy and keep out drafts, but mostly they provide an obstacle course for enterprising insects. In wealthier homes, the curtains are washed seasonally in boiling water and perfumed to discourage pests. In less fortunate households, the curtains are simply beaten, aired, and prayed over. The hope is that most of the wildlife will fall out before you climb in, or at the very least, stay on their side of the bed. Scratching is a fact of life. Any given Victorian dinner party features at least one person trying, with varying degrees of subtlety, to deal with an itch they know they shouldn't have. Etiquette books offer little advice, except to excuse oneself discreetly. If you scratch in public, the only polite thing to do is blame it on the weather or, if desperate, invent a sudden enthusiasm for miming farm animals. Entire industries spring up around the problem. Enterprising salesmen hawk lotions, powders, and even mechanical flea traps, which look suspiciously like something you'd use to torture a cheese sandwich. Perfume makers pivot to invent fragrances so strong they promise to repel all crawling things. There are posters, pamphlets, and homemade elixirs, none of which are entirely effective, but all of which offer hope. The rich might buy new mattresses or burn their bedding every few years. The poor make do with regular beatings of the mattress, not each other, though that sometimes happens too. Every spring, mattresses are lugged out to courtyards and whacked within an inch of their lives, sending up clouds of dust, feathers, and a few old friends. Some families keep pets, hoping a dog or cat will absorb the worst of the infestation, a sort of sacrificial offering to the gods of itching. Others embrace the folklore: sprigs of lavender under the pillow, chestnuts tucked into mattress corners, and the perpetual hope that tonight, finally, the bugs will have mercy. But in Victorian England, hope only goes so far. If you rise in the morning without fresh bites, count yourself among the blessed. More likely, you greet the day with a new batch of itches and the knowledge that tonight's sleep will be just as lively as the last. You didn't ask for these pets, but you live with them, itching, scratching, and holding out for the day when someone finally invents a mattress that doesn't crawl back. Until then, it's just you, the bugs, and the silent agreement not to ask who was here first. Need medical attention? Victorian hospitals are not famed for their cleanliness. Surgical tools are wiped on an apron, bed sheets are communal, and infection is just part of the charm. You arrive at the grand stone steps of the hospital not with a sense of relief, but with a deep, gnawing dread. After all, in Victorian times, a trip to the hospital is a gamble, half medical miracle, half lottery ticket, with the grand prize being not dying of something new. If you're unlucky enough to land in the charity ward, you're greeted by a wall of scent that can only be described as historic. It's a powerful bouquet of unwashed bodies, stale bread, old urine, and just a suggestion of carbolic acid for dramatic effect. The beds are lined up in tight rows, sometimes separated by thin curtains, more often separated by the hope that your neighbour doesn't snore or sneeze in your direction. Bed sheets, such as they are, rotate between patients with little more than a cursory shake, or, if you're especially fortunate, a spritz of vinegar. Pillows are shared, and if you find a stray hair or something that looks like a breadcrumb, consider it a little bonus from the last occupant. Doctors and surgeons march down the ward, looking distinguished in blood-stained coats that double as evidence of past victories, or possibly warnings. There is no hand sanitizer. Soap is a luxury. The notion of washing hands between patients is still considered a radical, suspiciously European idea. Surgical tools, bone saws, forceps, scalpels are cleaned with a quick wipe on the surgeon's apron, which itself is decorated with the greatest hits of last month's surgeries. The operating theatre is not for the faint of heart. Family members are sometimes invited to watch, if only to serve as witnesses in case things go sideways. There's no anesthesia for most procedures, just a strong drink, a leather strap to bite, and the encouragement of a nurse who's seen it all and isn't easily impressed. The nurse's uniform is white, but by the end of the day, it's closer to taupe. Instruments clink on metal trays, and if you're really lucky, the surgeon hums a cheerful tune to distract from the fact that his hands are not entirely steady. Infection is the silent companion in every hospital ward. Patients who survive the initial injury often find themselves in a secondary contest with hospital fever, otherwise known as sepsis, or, for the optimistic, character building, a wound is cleaned with cold water, maybe dabbed with a bit of whiskey, and then wrapped in a bandage that's been used on half the population of Whitechapel. If your condition worsens, you might receive the latest treatment, a generous application of leeches, or the application of a poultice whose recipe predates the concept of germ theory. Ventilation is a novelty, mostly handled by the occasional open window and a faint draught. The stench lingers, hanging over the ward like a damp blanket. Rats, finding hospitals as cozy as any human, scuttle between beds, occasionally pausing to examine a dropped biscuit. If you're lucky, the nurse shoos them away with her slipper. If not, they become unofficial roommates. Still, for all its risks and horrors, the hospital is sometimes your best hope. There are miracles here. Patients who limp in with shattered limbs and through a combination of luck, stubbornness, and experimental surgery, walk out weeks later. There's camaraderie among the sick, a shared gallows humour as patients place bets on who'll be discharged first and who'll simply become another cautionary tale. As you lay back on your creaking mattress, listening to the moans, coughs, and the distant sound of a surgeon singing God Save the Queen, you realise that hygiene here is not so much a goal as a rough suggestion. And yet, day after day, people heal, or at least survive, and the world keeps turning. Victorian hospitals, the original escape rooms. If you make it out with all your parts and only minor trauma, you've truly beaten the odds. Good soap is expensive, and most people settle for harsh lye or sand. Fancy scented soap is saved for guests, holidays, and people you want to impress or avoid offending. In Victorian England, soap isn't just a commodity, it's a status symbol. The upper crust might display dainty cakes of rose or almond soap on silver trays in their washrooms, meant more for admiration than actual use. For the rest of the population, the daily reality is altogether grittier. The average bar of household soap is a brick of yellow lye, capable of stripping away dirt, oil, and occasionally the first few layers of skin. If you're poor, you might make do with the family recipe, passed down through generations and improved only by the addition of whatever fat and ashes were available that month. Laundry day is when the true power of soap is on display. But for daily washing, most folks are stingy with the precious stuff. The bar is rationed, whittled down to a slippery sliver, and then pressed against the next new bar, waste not, want not. For the especially frugal, when soap runs out, a handful of sand, a scrap of lye, or just an enthusiastic scrub with a rag is deemed good enough. Some swear by using ashes, though that's a cleaning method best suited to those who don't mind smelling like a fireplace. Children are regularly threatened with soap as a punishment. Wash your mouth out is not just a metaphor. The taste of lye soap is a memory that sticks with you longer than most lessons. And heaven help any child caught using the guest soap, which is stored in a locked drawer or high shelf, only to be brought out for visiting relatives, the vicar, or, rarely, the family themselves during Christmas or after an unexpected inheritance. Bath night is where soap politics come into play. The first in the tub gets the biggest share. The last in line is lucky to see a bubble. Many a Victorian child grew up convinced that the only thing thinner than their weekly broth was the soap in their bathwater. Those who could afford it sometimes splurged on toilet soap, a term that sounds more glamorous than it is. Imported French soaps, wrapped in fancy paper and stamped with royal crests, were the height of sophistication, suitable for weddings, funerals, or making your neighbors jealous. The scent of soap is its own kind of social signal. Lavender, rose, almond, and lemon all speak of refinement, provided you don't use so much that people suspect you're hiding something worse underneath. Too much fragrance is as suspicious as none at all, and a sudden whiff of jasmine in a crowded room can draw raised eyebrows. The working classes, meanwhile, often go unscented, the only perfume being hard work and a determination to get through the week. For the thrifty, used soap ends up in a jar, melted down with water to create a gelatinous blob known as soap jelly. It's not pretty, but it gets the job done. Even then, every scrape of the bar and every drop of lather is counted. Stories circulate about the old aunt who kept soap in her linen drawer for a decade, bringing it out only for high holy days or especially grubby grandchildren. Despite its humble purpose, soap occasionally becomes a subject of public debate. Newspapers publish breathless articles about new hygienic miracles, such as carbolic soap, which promises to kill germs, banish odors, and possibly cure all known ills if you can afford it. Soap companies compete for royal endorsements, their advertisements boasting of complexions like alabaster and purity fit for a queen. Ordinary people read these promises and sigh, knowing their own bars are fit mostly for laundry and possibly keeping away stray dogs. Still, soap is a quiet hero in the Victorian hygiene saga. It's the weapon of choice in the fight against filth, even if it leaves your hands red and your wallet lighter. The next time you lather up with something gentle and scented, remember the Victorians, scrubbing away with sand, grit, and grim resolve, saving the good stuff for when it really mattered, or when company came calling. Entire industries spring up around the mountains of dirty linen. The women who do the washing are as tough as blacksmiths and just as likely to have arms of steel. Victorian London's laundry women are legends in their own right, the unsung titans of hygiene. Long before the invention of the washing machine, or anything resembling ergonomic design, these women faced down heaps of filthy shirts, stockings and petticoats with nothing but raw muscle, a wooden washboard, and a relentless sense of duty. Their day began before sunrise, with the clang of buckets and the creak of wringers, and ended after dark, their hands permanently puckered from lye water, their backs aching but unbowed. To be a laundry woman is to sign up for a kind of domestic boot camp. Water must be fetched by hand, often from a well halfway down the street or from the icy, suspicious-looking river that ran past the edge of town. Arms straining with the weight of sloshing pails, laundry women learn quickly that good posture is for the idle rich. Once the water is boiled in massive copper kettles, which need to be stoked, refilled, and watched like a misbehaving toddler, the real work begins. Soap is rationed with military precision, if you have any at all. Lye, homemade or purchased, is the go-to for removing stains and sometimes the top layer of skin. The soap stings cuts and roughens the hands, but the dirt yields, if only out of respect for the person wielding the brush. Every item is inspected, scrubbed, and beaten against a slab or rubbed across a ridged washboard, which is as gentle on fabric as a cheese grater. White linens are boiled to a rolling froth, with the occasional secret ingredient, bluing, starch, or, for the fanciest, a drop of lavender water to add a whiff of dignity. Rinsing and wringing out are next. This is the part that would make most Victorian strongmen cry. The laundry is hauled, sopping and heavy, to the rinse tubs. Here, it's twisted and squeezed until the water runs almost clear. For heavy quilts, petticoats, or work trousers, it sometimes takes 2 or 3 women to manage the weight. So if you ever wonder where the phrase iron grip comes from, look no further than the local wash house. Drying is another logistical challenge. Washing lines crisscross every alley, yard, and rooftop, transforming the city into a billowing forest of petticoats and drawers. Every laundry woman has a horror story about garments gone rogue in a windstorm, or some hapless child retrieving bloomers from the neighbour's chimney pot. Wet clothes freeze solid in winter, drape limp and damp in London fog, and collect coal dust faster than you can say industrial revolution. Ironing, if you make it that far, is not for the faint of heart. Flat irons are heated on the stove and wielded with the precision of a blacksmith. The iron is heavy enough to double as a doorstop and must be tested on a scrap before trusting it with your best shirt, lest you leave a scorch mark in the shape of a cautionary tale. Starch is carefully applied to collars and cuffs, producing garments stiff enough to stand up on their own and just as welcoming. And then, at the end of all this, comes the delivery. Laundry women haul baskets, sometimes nearly as large as they are, through muddy streets and up endless flights of stairs, returning bundles to grateful, if not always generous, clients. Payment is rarely prompt, but the respect is hard-won and grudging. Everyone in town knows who gets stains out best, who returns a collar the whitest, who can be trusted with silk or wool. These women carry the city's dignity on their shoulders, along with half its laundry. So next time you slip into a clean shirt or marvel at a crisp sheet, remember the biceps, blisters and bone-deep grit that made it possible. The laundry women of Victorian England, the true iron ladies. Feet are largely ignored until they start making alarming noises. Boots are stiff, socks are optional, and corn plasters are basically medieval torture devices. In the grand hierarchy of Victorian hygiene, feet are the forgotten peasants, left to muddle through on their own unless they stage a full-scale rebellion. Most days, you simply jam your feet into boots that were designed more for survival than comfort, and hope for the best. Socks, if you own any, are thin and more whole than fabric. Perpetually damp from either the London fog or a poorly timed step into a suspicious puddle. It's a time of great invention and industry, but not, tragically, of decent footwear. The average boot is an exercise in discipline. Crafted from stiff leather, broken in usually means barely less agonizing than when you bought them. For the poor, second-hand boots are common, shoes that have already shaped themselves to someone else's bunions, quirks, and mysterious odors. You lace up, wince, and get on with your day. Women's shoes aren't much better. Dainty slippers for the wealthy, chunky ankle boots for the working woman, and an overwhelming lack of arch support for everyone. Sometimes fashion dictates pointy toes or absurdly high heels, which is excellent for your posture if your main goal is never putting your full weight down. Victorians are nothing if not resourceful, and foot care is mostly an exercise in creative neglect. When blisters appear, and they always do, the cure is a homemade corn plaster, a circle of fabric soaked in vinegar and tied down so tightly you lose feeling in the whole foot. For those with a few spare pennies, a visit to the barber surgeon might yield a quick slice and dice job on a stubborn bunion or ingrown nail, performed with a knife and the cheerful reassurance that it will only sting a little. Socks are patched until there's nothing left to patch, and some people just go barefoot indoors, airing out toes and hoping that the cat doesn't use them as a new plaything. Aromatic foot baths are a luxury reserved for the truly decadent. For everyone else, a quick dab with a damp rag and maybe a sprinkle of talcum powder is as close to spa treatment as you'll get. You might hear rumours of chiropodists, early podiatrists, working wonders with files and oils, but the average Victorian will never meet one. Instead, you develop a close, complicated relationship with your own calluses, shaving, picking, and sometimes just ignoring them until the next harvest moon. Winter brings a new set of foot-related indignities, chilblains. These painful, itchy swellings are a badge of honour for anyone who's walked home on frosted cobblestones. Remedies are plentiful and often contradictory. Rub your feet with goose fat, soak them in mustard water, or just complain loudly until spring. And don't forget the threat of trench foot, usually reserved for soldiers, but not entirely unknown among the city's poorest, especially those whose shoes have more ventilation than sole. In wealthier homes, a footman, yes, that's partly where the name comes from, might assist the master or mistress with a daily foot washing and a fresh pair of slippers. But for most people, sore, swollen feet are just another part of existence, something to endure, not discuss. By the end of a long Victorian day, you kick off your boots with a sigh that's half relief, half existential reflection. If you're lucky, you avoid splinters, stubbed toes, and whatever lurks between the floorboards. You might take a moment to massage your aching arches, mentally promising to treat your feet better next week. You won't. So next time you marvel at a pair of modern sneakers or indulge in the wild luxury of soft, cushioned socks, spare a thought for your ancestors. Their feet bore the brunt of a world before gel inserts and Dr. Skulls soldiering on through mud, misery, and the never-ending march of progress, one bunion, blister, and battered boot at a time. Facial hair is both fashion statement and bacteria hotel. Soap, oil, and mustache wax are daily tools, at least for those who can afford the luxury of maintenance. The Victorian era is a golden age for facial hair. Everywhere you look, a mustache is being twirled, a beard stroked in deep thought, or a set of sideburns admired in a foggy mirror. Gentlemen compete to see whose whiskers can achieve the most dramatic flair, chin curtains, mutton chops, handlebar moustaches that could poke an eye out in a crowded carriage. For the ambitious, there's even the Dundreary, a set of whiskers so impressive they have their own social calendar. But maintaining all that facial real estate is not for the faint of heart, or the light of wallet. The tools of the trade are expensive and time-consuming. A sturdy razor, a stiff bristled brush, a chunk of shaving soap that smells faintly of camphor and regret, and, if you're feeling especially dashing, a silver-plated comb for twirling your ends. The morning ritual begins with hot water, a rare and precious commodity for most. Heated in a battered kettle and poured into a shallow basin. If you're wealthy, your valet prepares it all for you. If you're not, you make do with what's left over from the washing up. Shaving is a daily trial. Razors are wickedly sharp and spectacularly unforgiving. Cuts are frequent and often treated with a dab of alum or the nearest clean rag. For those wishing to avoid the risk altogether, beards are the safer, if itchier, option. And a thick beard serves a dual purpose. It hides a multitude of shaving mishaps and protects your chin from the cold, the wind, and the occasional harsh word from your mother-in-law. Soap is essential, but not always gentle. Ordinary bath soap is harsh and strips away more than just dirt. The best shaving soaps, imported or homemade, lather into a thick, creamy foam that softens even the most stubborn bristles. After the ordeal, a dash of bay rum or lavender water soothes both the skin and the ego, leaving you smelling vaguely of a spice rack. For the truly fashion-forward, mustache wax is a daily necessity. These little tins of beeswax and oil are prized possessions, doled out in minute quantities and applied with surgical precision. Achieving a perfectly curled moustache is an act of both science and art. Too much wax, and you look like you've dipped your face in lard. Too little, and the whole structure collapses at the first sign of humidity. The result, when done right, is a work of architectural brilliance that might survive a windstorm or a stern handshake. Of course, with great facial hair comes great responsibility. Beards and moustaches collect everything: crumbs, soup, tobacco ash, and the faintest whiff of last night's fish dinner. The phrase "food in your beard" is not just a joke, but a near-daily reality. Regular washing is non-negotiable for anyone hoping to avoid the dreaded beard itch or, worse, turning your facial hair into a thriving micro-ecosystem. Comb, brush, and oil are wielded daily, but there's only so much you can do. For those unable or unwilling to participate in the whiskered arms race, life is easier but less exciting. The clean-shaven look, favoured by a handful of iconoclasts and teenage boys everywhere, requires daily maintenance, courage, and a willingness to explain your choices to everyone you meet. There are always rumours about new inventions, safety razors, special oils, mysterious Eastern tonics that promise to make your beard grow faster or your mustache twirlier. Most are scams, but hope, like facial hair, springs eternal. Socially, your facial hair sends a message. The grander your whiskers, the more people assume you are wise, powerful, and possibly hiding a small family of mice. If you're clean-shaven, you're either very modern, very young, or trying to impress someone's grandmother. Either way, expect questions. So next time you admire a magnificent Victorian beard in an old photograph, remember the effort and the hidden mysteries lurking within. In an era before disposable razors and scented beard oils, every mustache was a masterpiece, every beard a labor of love, and every whisker a tiny, bristling badge of honor. Communal bathhouses double as social clubs and, for some, mildly scandalous destinations. It's a toss-up whether you'll leave cleaner or just better informed. Step into a Victorian bathhouse, and you're entering not just a place to scrub away the week's dirt, but the hottest hub for rumours, news, and questionable advice this side of the Thames. For those without a private bath, so, nearly everyone, the bathhouse is where society gathers to steam, soak, and spill secrets in equal measure. Rows of copper tubs line the steamy hall, each separated by a flimsy curtain, if management is feeling generous, and a wide berth of wishful thinking. The ritual begins at the front desk, where you hand over your penny and pray there's still some hot water left in the tank. An attendant, half bored and half scandalized, points you to your spot. The echoing tile walls turn every conversation into community property. Whispers bounce, laughter ricochets, and arguments occasionally burst out like soap bubbles. If you want to keep a secret, you'll have to hold your breath, literally and figuratively. Men and women bathe at different times, mostly, but that hardly stops the rumours. For ladies, the bathhouse is a sort of indoor marketplace of advice. Hairstyles, home remedies, and the marital habits of neighbours are dissected in hushed tones over clouds of violet powder. There's always one matron who claims her lavender rinse cured her chilblains and her husband's wandering eye. The rest listen, half believing, half plotting what to try next. Gentlemen, meanwhile, treat the bathhouse as part grooming lounge, part debate society, part unofficial stock exchange. Arguments about cricket scores mix with serious debates about the price of coal, the wisdom of the latest public works, and whether Lord So-and-so's moustache is, in fact, the real thing. In the corner, someone's always reading a newspaper aloud, adding commentary in a stage whisper. If you ever wondered how half the city finds out about the other half's scandals, look no further than the echo chamber of the communal bath. For the adventurous, the bathhouse is also a place of mild intrigue. The faint scent of perfume from the previous bather lingers on the air, mixed with the sharp tang of soap and the slightly alarming musk of damp wool. Couples occasionally arrange clandestine meetings under the guise of getting clean. Friends make pacts over shared sponges and steaming kettles. There's even the occasional political plot hashed out between soapy elbows and discreet coughs. Of course, not everyone is here for gossip. Some just want a proper scrub. The hot water loosens muscles sore from work, and the simple act of lathering up feels almost decadent. But even here, you're not alone. Children splash each other in the shallow end, much to the dismay of anyone hoping for peace. Elderly patrons regale anyone within earshot with stories of real bathhouses back in the old country, where the water was hotter, the towels softer, and the scandal even juicier. The rules of etiquette are as fluid as the water itself. If you drop your soap, you pretend you meant to. If you overhear a secret, you hold on to it for later. The most sacred rule: never, under any circumstances, inquire about the source of that mysterious floating object in the next tub. When your bath is done, you wrap yourself in a towel that's seen better centuries and emerge, cleaner in body if not necessarily in conscience. You've swapped a layer of grime for a layer of local colour. As you step back onto the city street, you realise you've just bathed in a stew of city secrets, and maybe, just maybe, the odd truth. So next time you daydream about a Victorian bath, remember, it's not just about the soap and water. It's about the stories, the society, and the ever-present possibility that you'll leave with a tale juicier than your neighbour's mutton stew. Cleanliness is next to godliness, but in the bathhouse, it's also right next to the latest gossip. Living near a factory means a daily aroma of coal, smoke, chemical waste, and, if you're near the river, something interesting wafting from the water. Welcome to Victorian progress, where prosperity smells a lot like sulphur and yesterday's dye vat. The city is booming. Smokestacks line the horizon, churning out plumes that blot out the sun on a good day and resemble a biblical plague on a bad one. Every morning, you step outside and inhale a cocktail of innovation, coal dust, iron filings, and a hint of whatever mysterious goo is being piped into the Thames that week. Factories are everywhere, looming over rows of cramped terraces like iron-fisted landlords. Their presence is impossible to ignore. If the noise doesn't keep you up, the smells certainly will. In the streets around the dye works, the air is permanently tinted with an unholy blend of chemicals, sometimes sweet, sometimes sharp, always faintly worrying. Clothes hung to dry outside don't so much air out as marinate, emerging with subtle notes of factory chic. Sometimes it's vinegar, sometimes burnt sugar, sometimes something so odd you can't quite put your finger on it, but you'll be thinking about it all day. The coal yards are no better. Mountains of black fuel arrive by barge and cart, blanketing entire neighborhoods with a fine layer of soot. Children wipe their noses and come away with smudges that would make a miner proud. Your hair is never truly clean. Your teeth, if you're not careful, pick up the taste of smoke with every bite. Residents develop a kind of grim pride about their local blend. "That's the smell of industry, lad," a neighbor will say, waving away a choking cloud as though it were a bothersome fly. Means there's money in the air. And then there's the river. The Thames, already challenged by the generous contributions of thousands of chamber pots, receives a daily bonus shipment from every brewery, tannery, and chemical plant on its banks. If you live nearby, you learn to identify the day's production schedule by the color of the water. Is it a deep blue? The indigo dyers are ahead of target. Reddish brown? The leatherworks are feeling productive. Is it bubbling mysteriously? Best not to ask. Those with the misfortune to live truly close to the factories have their own routines for survival. Windows are kept shut, even in summer, to keep out the worst of the fumes. Handkerchiefs and scarves are tied over mouths and noses, turning everyone into amateur bandits. Airing out a room is more about choosing which smell you'd rather invite in: burnt coal, rancid fish, or the faint but ever-present hint of sulphur from the matchworks down the street. Washing, too, becomes an endless battle. Clean laundry turns grey almost instantly. Sheets hung out to dry are often indistinguishable from the soot-covered alley they're flapping in. Soot finds its way into your tea, your stew, and your dreams. The enterprising sell soot scrapers for shoes and even have special brushes for hair and hats. The less enterprising just shrug and accept their new industrial patina. The city's wealthier quarters might escape the worst of it, but even there, the breeze can carry reminders. On a foggy morning, the entire city seems to hum with the scent of industry, an invisible badge of progress. "We're living in the future," someone will declare, coughing discreetly into a perfumed handkerchief. A little smoke is the price we pay. Children play in the shadows of the factories, inventing games that involve dodging puddles of dubious origin. They'll grow up with lungs of steel, or, at least, the ability to recognize the difference between Monday soot and Friday sludge. Visitors complain, residents boast, and through it all London keeps growing, richer and ever more aromatic. So next time you light a scented candle and complain about the smell of the neighbour's barbecue, remember the Victorians, for whom success always came with a side of coal smoke, mystery steam, and the faint, lingering suspicion that you'd left your windows open just a little too long. Victorian children are often just small, dirtier adults. They wash infrequently, run wild, and bring home every disease the city can offer. If you've ever wondered what happens when you mix endless curiosity, industrial pollution, and a complete disregard for soap, look no further than a Victorian child. While etiquette books might describe little darlings in lace and ribbons, the reality is a swarm of urchins, scuffed knees and all, who consider clean to be anything less than actively sticky. A proper bath is a rare event, usually reserved for Christmas. A catastrophic mud puddle or a lice outbreak so severe it's the talk of the street. The morning ritual, if it happens, is brisk. A cold rag to the face, a comb dragged through tangles with ruthless efficiency, and a reminder not to wipe your nose on your sleeve, though everyone does anyway. Some children receive a lick and promise cleaning, a mother's thumb dipped in spit, applied with determination to the dirtiest patches. This is followed by a hasty inspection for obvious stains and, if you're lucky, a threat involving a bar of soap if you show up to school looking like a chimney sweep. Speaking of school, the classroom is less a temple of learning and more a petri dish. Desks are shared, slates are swapped, and everyone coughs with reckless abandon. Teachers do their best, but there's only so much you can do when your charges have just come from sorting rags at the factory or chasing stray dogs through the market. Disease is a constant companion. Measles, scarlet fever, whooping cough, and lice form the unofficial curriculum. Hand washing is an optimistic suggestion, and sharing water bottles, or just drinking straight from the pump, is the norm. Outdoors, children's hygiene standards drop even further. Shoes, if owned, are quickly lost or swapped. Socks go missing by the pair. A child in full uniform at the start of the day is a marvel. By midday, shirt untucked, hair wild, and a new layer of street acquired, they're barely recognizable. Playgrounds, such as they are cobbled alleys, coal yards, and the banks of rivers best described as hazardous. Mud, ash, and whatever the local animals have left behind all become part of the fun. Bath night, if it happens at all, is another family adventure. Children are usually last in line, after parents, older siblings, and perhaps the family pet. By the time the youngest climbs in, the water has achieved a curious opacity, with floating bits that defy classification. Still, they splash, scrub, and emerge triumphant, hair plastered down and faces aglow. It might not be the cleanest clean, but it's a start, and for a brief moment, the household smells less like adventure and more like carbolic soap. Laundry is another battlefield. Clothes are patched, handed down, and washed only when absolutely necessary. Children are adept at finding the muddiest patch of ground within seconds of changing into clean trousers. Mothers sigh, children protest, and the cycle continues. Socks and underclothes are aired out in the hope that fresh air will do what water cannot. The theory is that if it's not crawling, it's probably fine. Despite the chaos, there's a certain resilience to these children. They may be grubby, but they're resourceful, tough, and unbothered by the minor indignities of grime and grit. They develop strong immune systems, or at least an impressive tolerance for unpleasant smells and itchy bites. Childhood is brief and busy, full of noise, movement, and the constant challenge of staying one step ahead of the nearest washcloth. So next time you see a pristine child in a museum painting, remember that the true Victorian kid is a walking, running, occasionally tumbling force of nature, cleanliness a fleeting goal, but energy and mischief in endless supply. In the grand saga of Victorian hygiene, children aren't so much lowering the bar as gleefully burying it in the backyard, probably next to a frog and someone's missing boot. Combs, brushes, tongue scrapers, and even early razors, all tools that look like they belong in a dentist's nightmare. But hey, at least you're making an effort. In the grand tradition of Victorian self-improvement, no morning is complete without a brief but perilous engagement with the era's best grooming gadgets. Imagine opening your top drawer to find an intimidating array of implements, some crafted from bone, others from horn, and a few from what you strongly suspect is leftover farm equipment. Victorian society places a high value on personal presentation, and with indoor plumbing still in its awkward teenage years, your arsenal of grooming tools does the work that a bathroom full of gadgets might do today, though with a lot more drama and occasional bloodshed. Let's start with the comb. For most Victorians, this is less a styling tool and more an exercise in masochism. The family comb, passed from hand to hand, is built sturdy enough to survive a house fire, but not so gentle on your scalp. Each stroke is a gamble. Will it detangle, or will it unearth a civilization of lice? If you're lucky enough to own a knit comb, you're also the family's first line of defense in the ongoing war against head pests. Forget the gentle plastic bristles of today. These teeth are so close together you could strain soup with them. Next, the brush. Hairbrushes are substantial affairs with handles that double as emergency. Back scratchers and bristles stiff enough to clean a boot. The wealthy can afford imported boar bristle or ivory-backed models, while the rest make do with whatever wood and animal hair are available. Daily brushing isn't just about smoothing tangles. It's about distributing oils, stimulating the scalp, and, with luck, producing a faint shine that hints at cleanliness if you squint. Razors in the Victorian era are neither disposable nor forgiving. They are straight-edged, heavy, and require daily stropping to keep sharp. The ritual of shaving is performed with the concentration of a bomb disposal expert, since one slip means a day spent explaining a suspicious neck wound to your friends. Early safety razors are just making their debut, but the term safe is generous at best. Aftershave, usually a splash of cold water, spirits, or lavender oil, serves as both a disinfectant and a wake-up call. Then there are the more specialized tools. Tongue scrapers, for example, are exactly as medieval as they sound. A thin metal device for removing the unspeakable from your tongue, in the hope that your breath might offend fewer people. Nail scissors, cuticle knives, and tweezers round out the toolkit, though their designs seem less about precision and more about cultivating humility in the user. Even toothpicks get the Victorian upgrade, with elaborate silver handles for those who wish to clean their teeth and signal their social status simultaneously. Ladies' vanities are a study in organized chaos. Hairpins, curling tongs heated in the fire, tiny scissors, and jars of pomade, a blend of lard, oil, and, if you're feeling fancy, rosewater. Eyebrow tweezers are brandished with the kind of determination normally reserved for duels. The brave or the slightly reckless attempt to curl their eyelashes with a heated needle with mixed results and occasional singed fringes. The less glamorous side of grooming is never far off. Tools are rarely sanitized. They are simply wiped on a cloth and returned to the drawer. It's not uncommon for an entire family to share a single brush or comb, leading to a communal sense of suffering and the occasional outbreak of something best not discussed. Still, every stroke, scrape, and snip is a step toward respectability. In a society that judges you on your parting, your polish, and the state of your sideburns, even a moment of grooming is an act of hope. So you steel your nerves, grip your brush with conviction, and wade bravely into battle, because looking presentable in Victorian England isn't just about hygiene, it's survival with style. When all else fails, you hold a perfumed handkerchief to your nose and hope to survive the day. It's practical, fashionable, and a clear signal to everyone. I smell the same things you do, and I hate it too. A staple of Victorian survival, the perfumed handkerchief is much more than an accessory. It's the social equivalent of an air freshener, an emotional support blanket, and a discreet way to suggest, yes, that's horse manure. No, I'm not happy about it. Tucked into sleeves, pressed to lips, and occasionally waved with a flourish, the scented kerchief becomes your personal shield against the great miasma of city life. Preparation is a ritual in itself. In the privacy of your bedroom, you sprinkle a few precious drops of lavender water or rose oil onto the finest linen you can afford, which, let's be honest, probably still has a mysterious stain from last winter. The more ambitious might go for violet, bergamot, or something marketed as spring morning but smells suspiciously of furniture polish. The scent has to be strong enough to mask reality, but subtle enough to avoid announcing your arrival before you round the corner. No one wants to be accused of using their handkerchief to launch a chemical assault. The need is constant. Step outside, and you're instantly assaulted by an orchestra of aromas, sour milk, fish stalls, the robust bouquet of unwashed humanity, and, if you're truly unlucky, the contents of last night's chamber pots being tossed from a second-story window. You try to breathe through your mouth, but sooner or later, the perfumed handkerchief is pressed, almost lovingly, against your nose. A deep inhale, and for one brief, glorious moment, you're transported to a land of distant gardens and clean laundry. It's not just for the streets. The handkerchief comes out in crowded omnibuses, at the market, in the public baths, and, most crucially, at the hospital or the home of a particularly pungent relative. Its presence is as comforting as it is necessary. Victorian etiquette even allows for the strategic use of the handkerchief in company. A gentle dab to the nose, a polite cough into the folds, a knowing glance exchanged with fellow sufferers. The message is clear. I acknowledge the problem, but I refuse to let it ruin my day or my dinner. For the fashionable set, handkerchiefs become a status symbol. They're embroidered, monogrammed, and carefully coordinated with one's outfit. The truly committed carry a selection, one for show, one for scent, and one hidden away for emergencies of a more nasal nature. Children are sent to school with a pocketful, though by the end of the day, the scented elegance is lost to mud and mystery stains. Manufacturers quickly catch on to the trend, producing aromatic handkerchief sachets and marketing scented handkerchiefs as the latest defense against cholera, influenza, and the existential dread of Victorian urban living. Advertisements promise miraculous powers, protection from bad airs, improved disposition, and even romantic success, provided you choose the right blend. It's a rare moment when self-care, public health, and fashion all align. Still, the limits are clear. No amount of bergamot can truly stand up to the full force of a London street in August, or the unventilated confines of a packed theatre. There comes a time in every Victorian's day when you simply accept your fate, lower the handkerchief, and power through, knowing you did your best to hold the line. At the end of the day, your handkerchief is less a relic of a lost world and more a badge of honour, frayed, faded, but still faintly fragrant. It tells the world, I endured, I inhaled, I survived. And as you lay it out to air for tomorrow's battles, you take comfort in the small victories. In a world ruled by smells, sometimes all you need is a square of cloth and a bit of hope. Bathing is a communal affair, but not in a charming spa day with friends sort of way. The entire family lines up for the weekly tub, and by the time you get your turn, the water is less refreshing spring and more lukewarm Victorian soup. If you're last in line, congratulations. You're technically dirtier than when you started. The ritual begins with the hauling of the bathtub, typically a battered copper or tin vessel that spends most of its life moonlighting as a laundry bin, storage trunk, or, on especially desperate occasions, a crib for the cat. It's dragged into the kitchen or by the hearth because that's the warmest place in a house designed mostly to let heat escape as quickly as possible. Buckets of water are fetched with grim resolve, each one a sloshing, bone-chilling reminder of how precious every drop is. If you're lucky, the fire's been going all day and the water is just this side of tepid. If not, you're already regretting your turn, and it hasn't even started. First in line gets the cleanest dip, usually the breadwinner, the eldest, or whoever wins the weekly arm wrestling match. This lucky soul lowers themselves into the steaming water with a sigh that echoes around the kitchen. Soap is rationed out, just enough to raise a few bubbles and give the illusion of freshness. There's a quick scrub, a splash, and then out you go. If you're feeling generous, you might leave a few suds behind for the next person. Second in line is still mostly an exercise in hygiene, but there's a noticeable shift. The water has cooled a bit, and the clarity is now vintage lemonade. Hair, dirt, and soap scum swirl gently at the surface like the world's least appetizing garnish. By the time the children get their turn, the bath has become a mysterious, greyish broth, a concoction of yesterday's coal dust, the week's sweat, and the general disappointment of having siblings. Each bather tries not to think about what's floating in the water, but every so often, something brushes your knee that is most definitely not your own. Etiquette dictates that you ignore it, as you would an awkward comment at the dinner table. A brisk, efficient wash is the goal. You're not aiming for clean, just less dirty than before. Faces are scrubbed, armpits are swabbed, and everyone is reminded, firmly, not to drink the water. As the water cools and the line gets longer, bath night turns into a spectator sport. Siblings jeer, parents threaten, and the cat stares in horror. The final bather faces the full reality of bathwater roulette. The water is now a murky stew, tepid and laced with the ghosts of baths past. There's not much point in soap anymore. The goal is simply to get in, get wet, and get out before you catch a chill or lose your nerve. Sometimes, by the last dip, you're convinced you'd have been cleaner just sitting next to the fire and hoping for a strong breeze. After the last person has braved the waters, the tub is emptied, sometimes out the back door, sometimes into the garden, and sometimes onto the street, where it will mingle with everyone else's bath water and the city's other liquid misfortunes. The tub is wiped down, in theory, dried, and returned to its daytime identity. Towels, if you have them, are shared, and everyone is herded off to bed with the lingering hope that next week, perhaps, you'll be first in line. Bathwater roulette is not just about hygiene, it's about family politics, pecking order, and learning to appreciate small victories, like finding a spot in the tub that's still warm, or a piece of soap that hasn't dissolved entirely. It's a lesson in resilience, resourcefulness, and the enduring hope that someday, somehow, everyone will get their own bath. Until then, you survive, you rinse, and you do your best to keep your mouth closed. Forget about floss. After a hearty meal of cold mutton and suet pudding, you reach for the nearest available toothpick, which might be a carved goose quill, a twig, or if you're feeling decadent, a silver pick reserved for special occasions. Table manners require you to cover your mouth with one hand while you poke, prod, and pretend you're not just fighting for dental survival. The Victorian dinner table is a test of both digestion and decorum. Food is hearty, filling, and occasionally challenging, with tough cuts of meat and bread that would give a modern jaw second thoughts. As the plates are cleared and the puddings disappear, the real work begins. You reach for your toothpick, stored in a little glass or, for the well-to-do, a velvet-lined case at the edge of the sideboard. Toothpicks are everyday essentials, used with the same pride as fine cutlery, but wielded with a subtlety that's more social dance than oral hygiene. For the ordinary family, toothpicks are made from whatever's handy. Splinters from the firewood pile, a whittled matchstick, or a handy birch twig fresh from the garden. The truly organised keep a stash of goose quills, snipped and shaped to a fine point, ready for action. For the upper classes, nothing less than silver will do, sometimes monogrammed, always slightly ostentatious, and polished within an inch of their life by a beleaguered servant. A fine silver toothpick is not just a tool, it's a conversation starter and a status symbol. Display it at the right moment, and everyone knows you mean business, especially the roast beef that's been stuck between your teeth since the first course. Technique is everything. Good Victorian manners dictate that you never bare your teeth, nor do you dig with the abandon of a gold prospector. Instead, you shield your mouth discreetly with one hand, lean slightly away from the table, and conduct your operation with the practiced air of someone performing minor surgery. Children watch and learn, trying to emulate their elders while failing spectacularly. More than one family meal ends with a scolded child and a piece of mutton flung across the parlour. After-dinner conversation continues unabated, but everyone's attention is half on their own dental predicament. There's an unspoken competition: who can extract the most stubborn bit of gristle, the last crumb of pudding, or the mysterious object lodged somewhere between the molars. Triumph is met with a quiet sigh of relief. Defeat means you'll spend the next hour distracted and slightly irritated. Occasionally, someone gives up and surreptitiously uses the corner of a playing card or the end of a hairpin. Necessity is the mother of invention, and dental discomfort is a powerful motivator. Public places require even greater finesse. In restaurants, inns, or at the theatre, the truly skilled Victorian knows how to conduct post-meal dental rescue with an air of genteel indifference. A handkerchief might come into play, or a polite cough to disguise any particularly enthusiastic efforts. The etiquette books remind you to never, under any circumstances, make a spectacle of your toothpicking. It's a private business, to be handled with dignity and minimal sound effects. Sometimes, a toothpick is more than a toothpick. For the creatively minded, it's a hairpin, a knitting needle, or the world's smallest weapon. Some entrepreneurial souls sell miracle toothpicks infused with mint or charcoal, promising to whiten teeth, sweeten breath, and possibly cure the common cold. Most are just splinters in fancy wrapping, but that hardly matters. Hope is half the battle. At the end of the meal, with teeth mostly clear and dignity partially intact, you slip your toothpick back into its holder, or, if you're like most Victorians, simply tuck it behind your ear for next time. After all, tomorrow brings another meal, another battle with Victorian cuisine, and another round of the toothpick tango. So the next time you sigh over the effort of flossing, remember your ancestors, fighting the good fight with a stick, a prayer, and the art of polite concealment, dental survival. It's what's for dessert. Even the most hopeful perfumes meet their match in the overwhelming presence of coal, smoke, and street effluvia. Some clever Victorians dab charcoal under their arms, in their shoes, or even in their hats, desperate to absorb unwanted aromas. The result? You smell like a festive bonfire wearing a hint of lavender. If Victorian London had a signature scent, it would be a swirling cocktail of coal smoke, horse manure, damp wool, and the occasional brave spritz of something floral. Everyone has their coping mechanism. The optimistic douse themselves in cologne and rosewater, hoping to hold off reality for an hour or two. But the determined innovator, the true survivor, turns to charcoal, that ancient miracle substance that promises to absorb odors and, with luck, most memories of the day. Charcoal, it turns out, is everywhere. If you're poor, it's what's left after the kitchen fire. If you're wealthy, it comes in a paper-wrapped cake from the chemist's shop, promising a fragrant shield against all manner of city stench. The theory is elegant. Charcoal soaks up bad, smells like a sponge. The practice is a little more theatrical. A pinch under each arm, a dusting inside your shoes, a sprinkle in your hatband. For especially tough cases, after a visit to the tannery or a close encounter with a night soil cart, a little dust is even tucked into pockets and sewn into the lining of your coat. If you're not careful, you leave smudges everywhere you go, marking chairs and shaking hands like a sooty phantom. But the perfume industry doesn't give up easily. Victorian chemists churn out colognes in every scent you can imagine: lavender, rose, sandalwood, bergamot, even eau de bouquet for those who prefer their floral notes with a hint of mystery. These aren't shy fragrances. They're bold, assertive, and determined to wrestle coal smoke into submission. The wealthy compete to see who can layer the most scents without causing fainting spells. The poor make do with a single cherished bottle, stretching it out, drop by precious drop, often reserved for Sunday church or the rare occasion when company is coming over. Of course, when cologne and charcoal join forces, the effect is memorable. You waft down the street, leaving a trail of competing aromas, smoky, sweet, and ever so slightly alarming. Strangers wrinkle their noses and try to guess whether you've just come from a fire or a flower show. Friends pretend not to notice that your handshake leaves their palm looking suspiciously dusty. For every person who claims charcoal absorbs all noxious vapors, there's another who swears it simply gives you a new kind of problem. Still, it's hard to blame anyone for trying. The alternative is surrendering to the full olfactory force of Victorian London. Homes are heated and lit by coal, so even at your cleanest, a thin film of soot settles on every surface and every inch of skin. Walk down a main street and the world hits you with a wall of scent. Fried fish, unwashed bodies, horse droppings, and that mysterious river funk that no amount of lavender can erase. Charcoal and cologne are the great levelers, a way for the banker and the bootblack alike to fight back against their environment. They represent hope, ingenuity, and a refusal to accept that smelling like a damp chimney is your only destiny. And so, every morning, you prepare for the day's battle. A dab of perfume on the wrists, a dusting of charcoal in the shoes, and out you go, smelling faintly of both garden and forge. At the end of the day, your clothes bear the history of every step, every handshake, every close call with a passing cart. But as you hang your coat and brush off the last traces of black powder, you know you've done your best. Maybe you smell a little strange. Maybe you've invented a new fragrance family, smoky floral with a hint of resilience. In Victorian London, that's practically a badge of honour. Soap is so prized it's practically currency. On lean weeks, people improvise with oatmeal, ash, sand, or whatever abrasive substance is handy. Washing up becomes less about being clean and more about losing a layer of skin and developing a strong personal relationship with the nearest aloe plant. For most Victorians, a bar of soap isn't just a household necessity, it's an aspirational object, something to be rationed, hidden from greedy children, and brought out only for the most special occasions, like an unexpected visit from the vicar or the once-in-a-lifetime event of bathing before Christmas dinner. The average family bar is shaved, scraped, and remolded into weird little lumps when it gets too small to hold. If you're caught using too much, prepare for a lecture, or worse, to be sentenced to dry scrubbing for the foreseeable future. And so, necessity becomes the mother of invention. With soap in short supply, you survey your kitchen, your yard, and the contents of your dustbin for inspiration. Oatmeal, usually reserved for breakfast and baby soothing, becomes a popular, if soggy, scrub. Mix it with hot water, apply to the skin, and tell yourself you're at a fancy spa rather than just covered in your own porridge. The results are mixed, but at least you smell wholesome, like a biscuit that's given up on life. If you're feeling gritty, there's ash, straight from the hearth and plentiful in every home. Ash is sprinkled into water to create a thin grey paste, which Victorians insist draws out impurities. In reality, it also draws out moisture, dignity, and the last remnants of your natural oils. Still, it's effective at removing dirt, and after a good ash scrub, you'll be so clean even your soul squeaks. Sand is another favourite, especially if you live near the coast or, failing that, near a builder's yard with low security. A handful of damp sand makes quick work of stubborn grime, especially on hands and feet. The only downside? It's essentially sandpaper, and after a few washes, you may find you've lost your calluses and a few identifying fingerprints. But, as any Victorian will tell you, smooth skin is a small price to pay for not smelling like yesterday's soup. There's always the fallback, vigorous rubbing. Sometimes a rag dipped in water and pure determination is all you've got. The act itself becomes half cleaning, half exercise, a public display of effort, if not actual effectiveness. On good days, a bit of lemon peel or a sprig of rosemary finds its way into the mix, adding a note of hopeful herbaceousness to the usual aroma of despair. Children, as ever, are the test subjects for all these innovations. A mother's wrath at discovering her last piece of soap missing is legendary, and woe betide the child who borrowed it for a mud pie experiment. If the larder is bare, little ones are sent to the nearest stream or pump with orders to get clean or get creative. More than one child comes home pink-cheeked and raw, claiming victory against dirt while stealthily hiding the rash developing on their shins. Some enterprising Victorians develop recipes for homemade cleansing concoctions: mashed peas, cold tea, potato peels, and anything remotely abrasive. There are newspaper columns dedicated to household hints, some sensible, most wildly optimistic. One popular tip: rub your hands with a raw potato and imagine yourself refreshed. Another: Mix bran with rainwater for a gentle facial polish. Desperate times call for desperate exfoliation. At the end of the day, true cleanliness is as much about intention as it is about outcome. You scrub, scrape, and hope for the best, taking comfort in the fact that everyone else is fighting the same losing battle. In a city where even the river could use a good wash, being mostly clean is a mark of distinction. If your skin glows, mostly from abrasion, so much the better. So next time you complain about running out of shower gel, remember the Victorians. A people so stubborn, they turned porridge, pebbles and fireplace leftovers into tools of hygiene, and emerged, if not sparkling, then at least a little less grimy than the day before. So, tonight, as you settle deeper into your soft bed, surrounded by the gentle hum of your modern appliances and the comforting certainty that your bathwater doesn't come pre-seasoned by your entire family, spare a quiet moment for our Victorian friends. After all, they survived an era where hygiene was mostly a rumour. Baths were rare, acts of courage, and the daily challenge was not so much will I feel fresh today, as will the coal smoke or the chamber pot win the battle for dominance in my living room. They muddled through with bracing spirit, an arsenal of handkerchiefs, and enough scented water to perfume half of London. Their resilience was legendary, not because they enjoyed hardship, but because there was no other choice. People found small joys, like the satisfaction of a new bar of soap or the thrill of being first in the tub. They endured each day, one toothpick and communal wash basin at a time. So if you're drifting off now, wrapped in clean sheets and possibly planning tomorrow's shower, remember, you have already triumphed over most of Victorian England's daily struggles. Your toothpaste is minty, your socks are dry, and your next bath won't require a coal delivery or the patience of a saint. History may be gross, inconvenient, and slightly terrifying, but it's also proof that people are adaptable, stubborn, and frankly, hilarious in the face of adversity. So give yourself a little gratitude for all the comforts at your disposal, and maybe whisper a thank you to the laundry machine, the flush toilet, and the miracle of indoor plumbing. May your dreams tonight be fragrant, your blankets cozy, and your worries as fleeting as a Victorian's bar of soap. Good night.